is going on, YouTube universe? Welcome to the Hip and Shoulder, where today we are diving on into another edition of the round recap, where we sit down and reflect on the previous round of AFL action. And we saw somewhat of a monumental shift from round 17 to round 18, being the fact that round 17 we saw the top 9 facing off against the bottom 9, and only one of those bottom 9 teams were able to secure victory. And round 18 saw a handful of those teams that are competing for a top 8 spot go head to head and really start to show us, you know, I don't feel definitively for some, but at least we're now starting to get a feel for the teams that will truly be competing versus those that might just be making up numbers. So we do have a fair bit to unpack this week. Join me once again. Hopefully we can get through this in one piece without me stumbling and bumbling too much, but it all kicked off on Thursday night with Carlton hosting Brisbane at Marvel Stadium. Regardless of the fact that this was being played at Marvel Stadium, I feel there is no surprise that Brisbane went into this game as heavy favourites. When you put the tail of the tape up and you look at these two teams head to head, Brisbane may have struggled a little bit at the Gabba this year, but they still find a way to find ascendancy around the ground, and their best is still amongst the best in the competition. Whereas when you look at Carlton, the fall from grace for them from last year to this year has been monumental, and we can look at injuries all we want, but I feel the key components that they have lost don't outweigh the brand of football they are playing, because they still have a star-studded list, especially when you still have the likes of Charlie Curnow running around, two-time Coleman medalist. You've got Patrick Cripps, two-time Brownlow medalist. You've got George Hewitt, who has taken his game to a new level this year. Adam Chera has taken his game to a new level this year. Jacob Wiedering in defence. They've bona fide that with the likes of Nick Haynes, who has been great for Carlton this year. They have star power from the defensive line all the way to the forward line, and yet they are still struggling to find ways to score. They are still getting outran in the contest in the midfield. This is a Carlton outfit that I don't think anybody expected to be delivering this type of brand of in 2025. I, again, had them tipped to make the grand final this year against Geelong, and then beat Geelong in the grand final to be the 2025 premiers. That's how invested I was in Carlton overperforming this year, or to many expectations delivering to that expectation, but they have failed to deliver so much. And the breakdown of it is they're struggling to score. The inability to hit the scoreboard has killed them, and I feel the biggest component they are missing right now, out of all the players that they've got on their injury list, it's Harry Mackay. And that's why, yet again, conversations around, you know, Carlton, can they keep a Curnow and a Mackay in the same team? I feel they need to. Even though a lot of the media experts are coming out and saying Carlton can't afford to have both, they need to trade one on, get some draft capital. It's proof in the pudding over the last month that Carlton without Harry Mackay has a Curnow who is absolutely struggling to find the ball. And I don't know whether it's the role that Curnow was playing that fails to deliver. I was having a conversation with my dad about this over the weekend, and we both feel that when both of these players are in the team, Harry Mackay should be the stay-home full forward that controls the forward 50. Charlie Curnow should be the one that moves further up the field, because he's got a better aerobic capacity, especially on the burst. If he can take a mark, he can get a long ball moving. And without that, Charlie Curnow staying at home, he's getting the number one defender. He sometimes gets double teamed. I've made some very brash comments about the fact that Curnow's not getting free kicks in front of goal, so his avenues to score have become limited, even though some stats will suggest that Curnow doesn't get as much free kicks in front of goal. I still feel out of all the key forwards in the competition, Curnow is one of the more looked after key forwards when it comes to umpiring decisions going the way of a forward line. And when we look at the stats over the last few weeks, or even the last month even, to see that he hasn't kicked a goal in over a month of football blows my mind, especially when you break that down into the teams he was playing against. The month prior, he actually wasn't doing too bad, but he was still kind of failing to live up to expectation, because this is a Coleman medalist, not once but twice. This is a guy who has beaten all other forwards in the competition with avenues to score. He is 30 goals off of the target that he hit last year. That's a huge drop off in my opinion. We have a look at the month prior to the one that we've recently undertaken. So we go back, we were around 18, so we run it back now to round 10. They played Sydney. He kicked 3 goals that game. Not bad considering Sydney's backline, especially when playing on a Tom McCartan type, is a good return. The following week they played GWS. He's playing on Sam Taylor. Sam Taylor might have gone down injured about that time, I'm not too sure. But he kicked 3 goals. So again, delivering. The following week he played Essendon. This is an Essendon team that has had a backline that has been rather depleted for the last couple of months. He kicked 2 goals. Okay, serviceable. The following week he played West Coast and only kicked 1 goal. Playing against West Coast, Curnow should be kicking 6, 7, 8 goals comfortably. And then after that, that was the last time he kicked a goal. Against North Melbourne, the following week, he kicked 1 behind. They then played Port Adelaide. He kicked 3 behinds. They then played Collingwood. He kicked 3 behinds. And then most recently, this past weekend gone, they played Brisbane, in which he kicked 2 behinds. He has kicked 9 behinds and 0 goals in recent weeks. Now, that could easily, okay, you could flip the script and turn around and say, but you know, Trent, he could have kicked 9 goals, 0. And okay, 9 goals, 0 would have gone a long way in those games, considering against Port Adelaide, he kicks 3 behinds. They still lose by, you know, even if he kicks the 3 goals, they're still going to lose by 40 points. So again, if he's hitting the scoreboard, they're still, you know, they're giving up too many goals as well. The following week, they play against, you know, Collingwood. He kicks 3 behinds that game. Even if he kicks those 3 goals, they still lose by 40 points. North Melbourne, even if he kicks the 1 goal that they, you know, they still lose. So it's a funny conundrum they're in, because while Curnow is underperforming and, you know, not delivering to expectation, it's a weird one, because even if he is on song, Carlton are still losing games. And this is why Harry Mackay, and we come back to the Harry Mackay situation, is so important to them, because he gives another avenue to score. They don't have to pull a Mitch McGovern out of defence and play him out of the forward line, you know, out of necessity. They don't have to rely on a Jesse Motlop to pop up, who is very inconsistent in his game. Jack Silvani has found himself sometimes up forward this year, but I think he's really solidified himself in the defensive 50 for Carlton. So it's a roundabout conundrum. It comes full circle, and you know, we can't probably put all the onus on not being able to score effectively on Charlie Curnow, but when you've got the big raps that he has, he's got 2 Colemans under the belt, he's a commodity that I feel most teams would go after if he was available in a trade situation. I just don't understand where this drop-off has come from in the last month. And it's no surprise that when you look at his drop-off in the last month, that these bigger kind of score lines have been coming, that the smackings have been dealt out. This game was no exception. Brisbane, for the entirety of this game, led from start to finish, and even though it was a tight margin at quarter time, I feel momentum was all the way of Brisbane, and it was never going to fall the way of Carlton. At quarter time, Brisbane led them 5-4-34 to 3-3-21. 13 points, okay, very winnable, but given the fact that we have seen over the past few weeks, and we broke it down last week, their inability to score between quarters has been astronomical, and it happened in this game again. You'll see it in a second, or at least you'll hear it because I'm talking about it. At halftime, Brisbane led 11-6-72 to 6-6-42. Blows out to 30 points, game's dead in the water, because at that point in time, we know Carlton have struggled to hit the scoreboard at times, only registering a few points a quarter, not being able to kick goals in second halves. So putting on this big of a margin come half-time, Brisbane had comfortable control. They were never going to drop this game. 3-quarter time, Brisbane led 15-8-98 to 6-10-46. Carlton only managing 4 behinds for the quarter. Then in the final term, Brisbane finish 15-13, 103 to 9-12, 66. Now, don't get me wrong, Brisbane only kicked 5 behinds in the final term. This is something that we have seen creep into their game this year with the inaccuracy late. But when the game is a dead rubber at halftime, by three-quarter time, it's all but how much you're going to win by. Carlton still in that final half of football kicked 3 goals, 6 against Brisbane going on to kick 4 goals, 7. Now, again, 4 goals, 7, not too much to really laugh at. But again, when the game's dead at half-time, they take their foot off the pedal. It's something that you could probably forgive Brisbane for just a little bit. But Carlton's still going on in a quarter and then only kicking the 4 behinds. And then for the rest of the game, kicking 3 goals, 2 following that, after Brisbane have kind of eased up a little bit. There was an injury to Noah Ainsworth, so out of defence they were down a little bit for Brisbane. He's done an Achilles injury. How long he's out for, I'm not certain. Carlton lose Orazio Fantasia to a hamstring, but again, does that really affect anything? I don't think he's a game changer for Carlton anyway, but it's still upsetting to see players get injured. It just adds to their forward woes, because that's another forward now out of circulation. They might have to start playing some other people out of position to really try to see if they can find ascendancy elsewhere. But this was just a very comprehensive beating. It was very easy. The midfield group got on top of them severely. Dane Zorko out off of half-back was sensational. Darcy Wilmot played one of the best games he's ever played for the club. It was outrageous just to see such a one-sided affair. I think 37 points in the end might actually flatter Carlton a little bit, given how dominant Brisbane were. That being said, we turn our attention to the votes for this game, because I feel there's not much more to talk about. We've seen Brisbane do this all year. They're just going to continue to do so. Carlton, I don't know, honestly, when they're going to find their next win. They might struggle to win a game for the rest of the year, which is huge for them, considering some of the wins we had through this round. And you compare some of the wins that some clubs have had to where Carlton are at this year, I think we would have had a much larger stem drawn between those clubs. But we'll dish the votes out. Obviously, 37 points, the way the game was played, I'm giving votes all the way of Brisbane. Darcy Wilmot will be the one that is stiff to not get a vote here. I just thought that in the scheme of the game, there were players who were a little bit more influential. That being said, obviously when it comes to delivering my team of the round at the end of the video, I reflect on players that might have missed votes and make sure that they get slotted in the right places. And Darcy Wilmot will be one of those players that makes my team of the week, because he was just... He was great. He really was. But the 3 I have landed on for votes, I think you really couldn't argue for. You could probably argue my 1 vote out for Wilmot, but for the 1, I went with Dane Zorko. He had 28 disposals, 22 kicks and 6 handballs, 7 marks, 1 tackle, 635 metres gained, and 7 score involvements. He's going to be an interesting conversation point this year, because I feel there are a lot of back pocket halfback flankers this year that can make the All-Australian team. And I feel, even though everyone's talking about a Nasiah Wanganeen-Malira, everyone's talking about a Jordan Clark, Lockie Whitfield even, I feel Dane Zorko should almost be a lock in that team, because when you look across the board, minus maybe 2 or 3 games for the year out of 18, he has been so prominent on the field, even if Brisbane are losing. So it was hard to look past him. His leadership on the field, his move to halfback has been almost revolutionary for Brisbane. And it came out of necessity from losing Kitty Coleman, but I feel they can afford to run Kitty Coleman and Dane Zorko off of opposing halfback flanks, and it's only going to make that defensive line so much greater. My 2 vote, I landed on Lockie Neale. He had 31 disposals, 18 kicks and 13 handballs, 7 marks, 8 tackles, 6 clearances, 463 metres gained. Surprisingly, only had 1 score involvement for the game, which is a little bit down on his output, but he still found plenty of the ball. He chopped up the midfield in a game that I honestly thought a George Hewitt would have gone to and being able to clamp him down. We've seen George Hewitt do that in the past with many midfielders, but no one was stopping Lockie Chocky Neale on this night. Best on ground, and he actually did receive the Best on Ground award for this game, and that was Josh Dunkley. 28 disposals, 13 kicks and 15 handballs. He had 6 marks, 13 tackles, 4 clearances, 285 metres gained, and 7 score involvements. If you've seen my content on this channel before, you would know that when it comes to midfielders in the competition, I truly value a midfielder that has a defensively sound repertoire to their game, being able to lay tackles and put pressure on the ball carrier, and very different from a Nick Dacos type. Now, Nick Dacos gets the ball and he works wonders with it, but often, more often than not, whenever you see an opponent running off, there's not much pressure being put on the ball carrier. There's a little bit of kind of jogging instead of a hard chase, and that's okay. He's not that type of player, and there are players in the competition that aren't that type of player, and that's why they ascend to different levels when it comes to their strengths. One of Josh Dunkley's strengths is his defensive game, the ability to pressure the ball carrier, the ability to tackle, the ability to shut down. He's truly, I feel, an unsung hero when it comes to Brisbane's midfield, and he shone in this game entirely. It's just a shame for Carlton fans to see the drop-off. Me personally, I kind of chuckle deep inside. I've got some preconceived notions and kind of thoughts about Carlton's supporter base, just off of personal experiences. So whenever I see Carlton down, part of me chuckles, part of me just questions where this drop-off has come from. Now, okay, no Harry Mackay, no Sam Walsh, no Nick Newman, but apart from that, they're pretty solid, and that's what I'm saying. They still have a great list, so where has this drop-off come from? Is Michael Voss's time up? Do they need to find a shift on field and get rid of some of those, B-grade, C-grade players to try and get an A-grade player in? If you're a Carlton supporter and you're watching this, let me know in the comment section down below, because I'm still scratching my head as to where they go from here. Friday night footy saw Gold Coast hosting Collingwood at People's First Stadium. I have said in almost every tipping video I have dropped, whenever it comes to the Gold Coast playing at People's First, they are a different beast. They go to a new level. I didn't think they would go to the level they went to in this game, though, because to think at halftime this game should have been done and dusted and not as hard fought into the wire as it got in the final term, it came as a complete shock, and I feel I jinxed Collingwood. A few weeks back, I turned around and said, I don't know where Geelong's next loss is going to come from, and then GWS rocked up to GMHBA Stadium and knocked them off. I did the same this past week to Collingwood. I did say I jinxed Geelong the last time, but this time I said I don't know when Collingwood are going to lose their next game. And they lost to the Gold Coast at People's First. But when you look at the scoreline, I feel Gold Coast, I don't know whether they, like everyone's saying this is the best win of the club in the club's history, that this sets momentum for them playing finals. That's all well and good. From a neutral standpoint, I don't know whether they would be happy with the outcome, given how this game played out, because I still feel this has too many inconsistencies creeping into their game that could cost them come September. I don't think they're going to do any damage, and the outcome of this game kind of speaks volumes to that fact. We'll get down with the breakdown right now. The scoreline itself, at quarter time, it was Gold Coast 2-5-17 leading Collingwood's 4 single behinds. Now, at that point in time, 13 points. Game can turn on its head at any point. They've got a great forward line this year, Collingwood, which has been one of their strengths. They've got Dan McStay. They've got Tim Membry. They've got Jamie Elliott. They didn't have Brody Myercheck. They didn't have a Jordan De Goey. There were a few players out of this lineup that I feel could have been monumental game changers for them. They're just in the process of resting players, I feel, to make sure come finals they're at the peak of their powers. And very much so, I think Collingwood fans would rather drop a game now than drop a game come September. But this scoreline, it still blows my mind. They went from 2-5 playing 4 behinds at quarter time to half time, Gold Coast leading 6-7-43 to 8 behinds. Collingwood didn't score a goal for the first half of the game. When it comes to how close this game was in the end, they had their chances, Collingwood, and they would be filthy. I'd feel, even though Craig McRae gives a great demeanour on camera, off camera, he would have been ripping paint off the walls in those fucking change rooms, I can tell you that. 3-quarter time, Gold Coast led 8-9-57 to 3-11-29. Gold Coast kicking a couple, but Collingwood getting a few goals kicked, and it was funny because Tim Membry finally kicked their first goal. It took almost 2.5 quarters for it to come, and I messaged one of my close mates and said, you watch Collingwood ride momentum off of this singular goal. I've said it numerous weeks, I've said it in tons of videos. Collingwood, when it comes to riding the wave of momentum in a game of football, do it the best in the competition by anybody. The belief in their systems hold up true. When you hear the Collingwood supporters get that Collingwood death rattle going around the ground, it is very off-putting, not to just the supporters from the opposition, but the players hear that and it rattles them. It truly does. The final scoreline saw Gold Coast 10-9-69 defeat Collingwood 8-15-63. To think that this was a 30-plus point lead at half-time and they won by a singular kick is huge. In the second half alone, Gold Coast only managed to kick 4 goals 2. Collingwood went on to kick 8 goals 7. And in that last quarter alone, players like Josh Dacos had one of the biggest individual quarter performances I've seen in a very long time. Statistically, when you look at things like AFL fantasy, Nathan Buckley back in like 2001, 2002 was the last player to have as big of a quarter as Josh Dacos did. He almost single-handedly off his own boot won this game, and it's not the Dacos brother we're usually talking about, but now there's conversation points in the media talking about the fact that Josh Dacos can become a top 5, top 10 midfielder in the competition. I've always rated Josh Dacos. His run off of the wing was huge for Collingwood. His move to half back has been brilliant for Collingwood. I really love the reinvention of these midfielders to half backs. We've seen it with Dane Zorko with Brisbane. We've seen it with Josh Dacos and Collingwood. We've seen it with Connor Rozee and Port Adelaide. They just go to a new gear. They unlock something in their game, and he was absolutely huge. And, you know, similarly on the flip side, Matt Rowell, Noah Anderson standing up and kicking a goal of the year contender. If that goal that he kicked doesn't end up in the final 3 that gets voted upon at the end of the year, I would be heavily surprised. Just getting a tap down and getting a clean clearance when your backs are against the wall, and then getting a handball off, getting it back, and then kicking a goal unimpeded. No pressure on him. He ran it from the centre square to almost 40 odd metres out in front of goal. That's a captain's goal if there ever was one. He was huge. It just blows my mind though. And this is where the inconsistencies I feel creep in. We have a team that was 30, almost 40 odd points clear at half time and then struggled to score for the rest of the game. And a Collingwood team that didn't kick a goal in the first half, doubled the output of the Gold Coast in the second half. I don't know whether it was a case of we're clear so we can take our foot off the pedal a little bit. There was definitely a shift in momentum in the way of when Collingwood started getting on top, Gold Coast shrunk into a more defensive mindset and felt like they had to protect the ball at all costs instead of still scoring. Don't know whether that just comes from inexperience in these positions, whether young kids were under pressure. They'll learn from this. They'll build upon this. This win does take them a long way to setting up a finals berth this year, their first finals appearance in club history. I just feel that the gap that was closed in the second half of this game tells me that they might struggle against, these top 8 teams that are contending, because not every team is going to give them a 0-goal, break in the first half. Not anybody, is going to give them a big enough gap where they can get complacent, and they can't afford to get complacent in a big game like against a Collingwood or against an Adelaide or against a Geelong or a Brisbane. They need to really lock down, and Gold Coast have some games coming up that's really going to test their mettle. Again, with Collingwood, they'll be bitterly disappointed. I think on the flip side of things, they'll take a lot out of this game because they still found a way to only be a goal down. So I don't know whether the scoreline flatters it. I feel Collingwood were definitely the better team in the second half. It was a game of two halves. Gold Coast dominated the first, Collingwood dominated the second. Gold Coast just found a way in between gaps to score or to slow play down. But it was those gaps that need to be bigger moments. They need to be longer sustained. Maybe I'm being a little bit too harsh because I've got some preconceived notions about Damien Hardwick, as a Richmond man. But it was a great win for Gold Coast. Collingwood, I feel at this point in their season, would rather drop a game now. I mean, as I said, they rested a few players. Scott Pendlebury only played half a game. Jeremy Howe was subbed out of the game for the second half. So they've got some players to come back in, and it's only going to make them better for it. But Gold Coast laughing all the way home with a win, and you could just see how stoked they were at the end of the game when it came to winning this game. When it comes to the votes, I obviously have spoken about three particular players in this game, and I feel Rowell, Dacos, and Anderson were the best three on the field. It was just where those players landed. I did say at the end of the game I felt Josh Dacos was best on ground, just given that quarter performance he had in the last. But then I've got to have a look beyond that and see where players stood over the four quarters. And this is where I landed. I hope I've done due diligence here. The one vote I gave to Matt Rowell. He had 32 disposals, 16 kicks and 16 handballs, 1 mark, 13 tackles, 12 clearances, 565 metres gained, 2 goals, and 6 score involvements. Something very funny about this game. Obviously, over recent weeks, there has been the mention of the fact that the AFL are going to be shutting down on umpire contact, and players are going to now start getting suspended for that if it's severe enough. I think now, if there are fines given out for player contact, if you hit 4 fines, it's an automatic suspension, or at least you get sent to the tribunal. That is currently what Adam Cerra is facing for Carlton. I haven't done enough research into that to know whether Adam Cerra actually was sent to the tribunal for that or not. But Matt Rowell, the conversation around him has been that he gets himself in very bad positions, and almost more often than not, he's making umpire contact. And there is something that I realised about the way he played this game that I think we've uncovered the reason as to why he comes so close. There are at least 5 to 6 times I counted where the moments that he could have had with making contact with an umpire were very minuscule. Like, he only got out of the way at the last moment. I feel, and there was an example of this in the game, because Nick Dacos ended up making contact with an umpire, and people were questioning whether or not he would get suspended for it. That was because I feel Matt Rowell uses the umpire as kind of like a guard to break contact with his direct opponent and get a little bit of ascendancy around the contest. Nick Dacos bumped into an umpire because Matt Rowell kind of pushed him into the contest a little bit. When you lock arms against an opponent, if an umpire is coming back into you and you kind of set yourself up where the umpire is coming back into your shoulder, you can kind of set it up as if, if you move at the right time, you can back out, but your opponent might get impeded and it gives you a break at the contest. I think that's how Matt Rowell bases his clearance game, especially when it comes to random ball-ups and throw-ins around the ground. If you don't agree with me now, watch Gold Coast moving forward after this point in time and then come back and tell me I'm right, because I feel I definitely am. The 2 vote for this game, I landed on Josh Dacos. 32 disposals, 16 kicks, 16 handballs, 4 marks, 7 tackles, 5 clearances, 656 metres gained, 2 goals, and 10 score involvements. He had a good game up until 3/4 time, but that final term almost brought them back into the game off his own boot. The move from half-back into the midfield, I really feel Craig McRae needs to play both Dacos brothers in the centre at the same time, because they love finding each other with the ball. They're both damaging with the ball. Going to be an interesting watch to see how he's used moving forward. 3 votes, though. Could not look past Noah Anderson, especially that captain's goal that essentially was the deciding factor in this game. Absolutely huge. 32 disposals, 10 kicks, 22 handballs, 3 marks, 4 tackles, 8 clearances, 396 metres gained, 1 goal, and 6 score involvements. Again, Collingwood will be upset that they dropped a game that they could have won. I mean, they kicked 15 behinds. They only need to convert 2 of those and they win the game. But given the scoreline at halftime to where it landed, I think there's a lot more positives to take out of the game for negatives if you're Collingwood. For the Gold Coast, great win. Again, one of the best in their club's history, one that's going to give them belief come finals. But I feel there are a lot more negatives to come out of this game for them than people are suggesting. The first cab of the rank on Saturday afternoon saw the Bulldogs hosting Adelaide at Marvel Stadium. Now, up until this time, we have seen Gold Coast take on Collingwood, 2 top 8 teams. This was a top 8 clash that I feel was the most definitive in ways of what both teams had to play for here. Because both teams have been spoken about in negative lights to some degree, especially from myself last week. The Bulldogs are a team that have been flat track bullying teams underneath them but haven't been able to defeat teams above them. And Adelaide have had some games where inaccuracy from their opposition have allowed them to win games. So I feel that there are maybe 2 or 3 wins this season that they can probably consider themselves lucky to have picked up those points. And had they not won those games, they wouldn't be in the top 8 currently. So this game was definitely one that both clubs had something to prove. The Bulldogs had to prove they could beat a top 8 contending team. Adelaide had to prove that it's not just sheer luck that they have landed within the top 8, let alone a top 4 configuration. And it was Adelaide that had this game under control from start to finish. And I was stupid enough to tip the Bulldogs, and I probably shouldn't have done so. And I feel now for the rest of the year, I will struggle to have belief in the Bulldogs whenever they play a club that are above them. Because even though individual performances from players like Marcus Bontempelli were through the roof in this game, they just did not have an answer for Adelaide at all. Adelaide, just from the first jump, knew what they had to do in this game, and they delivered. It was momentum all their way. There was still, obviously, only a 7-point gap at quarter time, but after that, I just feel, despite the scoreline, Adelaide's momentum was just infinitely greater. Their ball use around the ground was great. They were, going from contest to contest with tackles. We can even look at the statistics for the game shortly, and I'm almost certain those statistics will back up that Adelaide were the better team overall, competitively. Looking at the scoreboard and the score line, again, I think it speaks volumes to that fact. At quarter time, Adelaide's 4-2-26 led the Bulldogs 3-1-19. 7 points. Very gettable at that point in time. But even though, as I said, the scoreboard was a little bit flattering. 7 points at quarter time, but I feel Adelaide had a lot of that momentum in that game. Bulldogs hit the front a couple of times, but Adelaide were able to quickly respond. And at halftime, Adelaide led 10-4-64 to 7-3-45. 19 points. Some people might not think that is a big enough gap, but the actual game itself proved differently. Again, there are many games that we get over the course of a year in football where the scoreboard doesn't reflect just how well a team is playing. And even though they might not have been scoring goal after goal after goal, Adelaide's use around the ground was infinitely greater. 3-quarter time, it was Adelaide 14-9-93, leading 10-6-66. And then the final score line, which saw the Bulldogs come home incredibly hard. And I was watching this game with my dad, and I was making comments saying, oh, can the Bulldogs come back? Because I tipped the Bulldogs, so I was obviously trying to ride them all the way home. But in the end, it was Adelaide 16-13, 109, defeating the Bulldogs 15-8-98. In that final term alone, it was 2-4 from Adelaide, and it was 5-2 from the Bulldogs. They were trying every which way. There was a final blow from Riley West, I think it was, that had it gone through, there would have been about 8 seconds left on the clock to potentially get a clearance and a mark inside 50, and I made the joke that Aaron Norton would mark it and then kick it behind and they'd still lose. But Adelaide, as I said, we look at the stats for this game. We'll bring the team stats up right now. Disposals was won just marginally by the Bulldogs, but when you look at the even disposal efficiency, they were both very even. It was just the efficiency inside 50. Adelaide were almost 10% clear of the Bulldogs, and ultimately that's what's going to win you games of football. When you move that ball inside 50 and you can be so clean with disposal when it comes to resulting in goal, it's going to win you games. And when you're 10% clear, that's a big enough gap of ascendancy to know that one team is going to outperform the other. A lot of people were talking about the free kicks in this game, and that Adelaide were well looked after with these free kicks. 25-18 was the final margin. Both clubs, well, Adelaide exceeded their average. Bulldogs hitting their average, so I'm not too sure about that. In the ruck, I was actually quite surprised that Riley O'Brien, I felt, had a much bigger game than Tim English. I feel Tim English should have been licking his lips in this game to be absolutely well and truly over the top of Rob here, but wasn't. Clearances, the Bulldogs won. Stoppage clearance was where they got them as well. Contested possessions, the Bulldogs won slim. So statistically, actually, the Bulldogs were doing a lot better, but this is where, you know, they might have been dominating clearance and things like that, but when you have a look at things like marks, Adelaide led 105-88, so just showing that they had a lot more control of the ball around the ground. Marks inside 50, they took 17-9. Contested marks, they had more of. They laid more tackles, even though the Bulldogs had more clearances and more use of the ball. Adelaide had 10 more tackles for the game. Bulldogs were better with tackling inside 50, but outside of that, the pressure game from Adelaide was just infinitely greater. They were able to lay tackles, they were able to force turnover, they were able to capitalise and then control the ball. At the end of the day, that was the decision maker. It was a team that was willing to not only win the ball for themselves, but then get the game on their terms and control momentum and flow and speed. It's what teams like Collingwood are great at, what Geelong are good at. They're able to get possession, slow things down. Game is completely on their terms. And while the Bulldogs found a way to stem the flow late, Adelaide just had that big of a gap that in the end, it could have been, you know, it could have been the Bulldogs' way, but Adelaide just clung on. And it was, I don't know whether we can say it truly separates them. I don't know whether the scoreline flatters the Bulldogs here, because Adelaide would, I feel, you know, the better team on the day. I don't know where this sits with me. It just, to me, it tells me that Adelaide we can take a little bit more seriously, maybe a lot more seriously, and with the Bulldogs, maybe more question marks than answers. I don't know. I really don't know. A big talking point out of this game, though. Sam Darcy made I don't know whether it was a closed fist or an open fist, but he made contact with Jordan Butt's chest. Jordan Butt, it's been reported from some that he has a punctured lung. Some are saying he's got a collapsed lung. He's still in hospital, regardless. He got subbed out of the game. And people were calling for Sam Darcy's head. Now, contact like that, you know, forceful hits to the chest or pushing, that's been happening for years. And Sam Darcy, I don't think he's even been fined for it. He shouldn't have been suspended for it. But I feel more questions. Now, this could just be me and my Richmond bias, but this is the second time in recent weeks where Jordan Butts has found himself on the end of a key forward making, you know, forceful contact to him off the ball. I don't know whether Jordan Butts has something in his game where he's grabbing a hold of the forward, whether he's doing too much to impede their game and it's setting the forwards off. But Tom Lynch and now Sam Darcy in recent weeks have made forceful contact with Jordan Butts off the ball. I don't know. Make of that what you will. Looking at the votes for this game, I feel it was pretty straightforward for the three. I don't think anybody else could have pushed in here, and I feel you can't really argue the configuration I've gone here for the 1, 2, 3. They were clearly the three best on ground. I wouldn't be surprised when come the Brownlow votes, these are the three that land in those votes. Whether or not the Brownlow goes a different way, because one of these players is a lot more loved by umpiring fraternity than the other two. But the one vote I gave to Riley Thilthorpe. He had 17 disposals, 13 kicks and 4 handballs, 9 marks, 2 tackles, 2 hitouts, 235 metres gained, 6 goals and 10 score involvements. The 2 vote I landed on Marcus Bontempelli. He did everything in the final term to try to get the Bulldogs over the line. Very similar to the Josh Dacos output we saw. And it just shows that Marcus Bontempelli is still very well one of and considered by most as the best player in the competition. 37 disposals, 17 kicks and 10 handballs, 8 marks, 12 tackles, 8 clearances, 778 metres gained, and 11 score involvements. But best on ground for me was Jordan Dawson, and come the end of the year with the Brownlow votes, this guy's going to give it a red hot crack. 27 disposals, 16 kicks and 11 handballs, 4 marks, 8 tackles, 6 clearances, 421 metres gained, 2 goals, and 12 score involvements. Would love to know, if you're a Bulldogs fan, where you think your club sits from this point moving forward. Because I feel out of the teams currently in the top 8, the Bulldogs are probably the one at risk more so than anybody else of dropping out of that configuration. Adelaide, I feel at this point in time, at their best, at their peak, it's just a matter of whether they finish in a top 4 spot or a top 8 spot. I feel if they go top 4, very much so still can be the dark horse of the comp. I said it at the start of the year. I even said it last year. I'll back it up again. These guys finish top 4, they're going to give finals a red hot crack. GWS hosted Geelong at NG Stadium, and this one was interesting. I had enough belief in myself and in GWS that having defeated Geelong in Geelong a few weeks back, they could defeat Geelong at home. And this, after a very interesting first term that really had my thought process against the ropes, was a very interesting game, because it was a game that saw Geelong take a lead and then GWS absolutely balloon out at one point, but then Geelong brought it back. True arm wrestle for 3 quarters, and then the last term from GWS was just something else. GWS picking up a very monumental win here. I feel Geelong very much in the same boat as Collingwood. Happy to lose games around at this point of the season versus September. But this is now twice GWS have been able to find a way to knock Geelong off. So this gives true belief to a young GWS team that they can get the job done come the pointy end of the season and come finals. The scoreline will show what that arm wrestle kind of looked like when you break it down. At quarter time, it was Geelong leading 4-2-26 to 2-1-13, leading by 13 points. Anybody's game. Again, very manageable, especially when you look at the forward half of GWS. At halftime, it was GWS 7-5-47, leading 6-5-41. 6 points the way of GWS, but at one point in time, this looked like a blowout was going to happen, and then Geelong managed to find a way just to bring things back under control. 3-quarter time, after an up and down third quarter term, it was 12-8-80, leading 8-7-55. 25 points the way of GWS. We have seen Geelong come back from worse, but at this point in time, I thought that even though Geelong found ways throughout this quarter to bring momentum back onto their side, I felt GWS at 3-quarter time had the game on their terms and under their control. And we've seen their defensive side of things. We know that they're not scared to continue pushing the ball on with that orange tsunami. So we knew we weren't going to get sucked into a GWS that were going to start chipping the ball around and try to gain momentum. And that's exactly what they did not do, because the wave from the orange tsunami was too hard to stop. And the final scoreline saw GWS 17-9-111 defeat Geelong 13-7-85. It was a final term that saw maybe a goal or two kind of exchange where GWS would kick one, Geelong would get it back. But it was always GWS finding a way to answer what Geelong was putting up. And it was another game where young kids like Aaron Cadman just stood tall and brought this game to a standstill and really, announced themselves to the AFL world, for lack of better terms. It was a game that, off of individual performances, Aaron Cadman had little to no influence in the first half at all. And then when GWS turned it up and momentum swung their way, was, I feel, and it's going to be reflected in the votes, was the best player on the field, just given the output this kid had. I know we can't sometimes say a quarter or two definitively makes a better player than players that played a 4-quarter performance, but Aaron Cadman's performance in this game was huge. And, we talk about young talent. We're always harping up like a Sam Darcy. We're hyping up players, like Nate Caddy, and Nate Caddy from Essendon getting hyped up as one of the best young key forward prospects. Logan Morris, Aaron Cadman, not getting spoken enough about, and this was a game where Aaron Cadman came out and said, you know what, you can keep talking about all those other players, all eyes on me. It was a comprehensive GWS performance, and this is a performance that can take them a long way come September. It gives enough belief that they can get the job done. My votes for this game, Did fall all the way of GWS players. Again, it was hard to work out configuration for these votes. This is how I landed. I dropped 1 to Finn Callaghan. He had 29 disposals, 17 kicks and 12 handballs, 2 marks, 2 tackles, 9 clearances, 535 metres gained, and 8 score involvements. I feel before his injury, he started dropping off the pace a little bit, but after coming back, he's just gotten back to his best. He's been one of their most improved this year, and he's going to be one to watch over the next few years. It's no surprise that St Kilda apparently wanted to throw big money at this guy. Any club looking for a young midfielder to really build a team around should all have eyes on Finn Callaghan. The 2 votes I gave to Lachie Whitfield. 32 disposals, 22 kicks and 10 handballs, 11 marks, 1 tackle, 1 clearance, 462 metres gained, and 5 score involvements. And best on ground, as I alluded to, I thought it was Aaron Cadman. I feel he was the deciding factor in the second half and really solidified his place around the conversation of best young key forwards in the comp. 15 disposals, 13 kicks and 2 handballs, 8 marks, 1 tackle, 505 metres gained, 6 goals, and 8 score involvements. When you've got young kids going to a level like that, and you've got a Toby Bedford who's able to take an influence from Bailey Smith out of the game, and you've got other role players in the team that just consistently get their job done, it's no surprise that when we talk about some of the best lists in the competition, that I've always got GWS within probably the top 3 or 4 lists. They deliver when they deliver. It's just this year, the gap between their best and their worst has been far too inconsistent, but wins like this are going to take them a long way in this back half of the year heading into finals. First of 2 on Saturday night saw Richmond hosting Essendon at the MCG in one of the worst games of the season, probably the worst game of the season, let's be real, but one of the worst games I've seen in recent years. It was a game riddled with skill error. If you played the Benny Hill theme song, you could run it from the first quarter all the way to the final siren, and it would just fit so comfortably. It was frustrating as a Richmond supporter to watch this game, but at the end of the day, Richmond picked up their 4th win of the year. This is a team that was predicted to win 0, so to get 4, well and truly exceeding expectation, but it wasn't all happy days out of this game because there's a lot of doom and gloom, especially for Essendon. We'll get to that in a moment. I want to break down the scoreline and show you just how pathetic this game was. At quarter time, Richmond led 3-4-22 to 3 goals straight 18, and I thought, okay, this is going to be a good contest. We've got a game on here. But for the second quarter, Richmond kicked 1 behind, Essendon kicked 6 behinds. We got 7 points out of an entire quarter of football, so it was 3-5-23, trailing a 3-6-24 the way of Essendon. 3-quarter time, it was Essendon with the lead, 4-10-34, playing 3-9-27. So Essendon kicked 1 goal for, Richmond kicked 4 behinds. It gets worse, trust me. The final scoreline was Richmond 6-10-46 defeating Essendon's 4-13-37. So in the second half of football, in the first half of football, we saw 6 goals kicked collectively. In the second term, we saw 4 goals. We saw 4 goals. 4 goals kicked collectively. Before the game, we saw 23 behinds. It was bad. The skill level was terrible. Jacob Kaczynski. Now, I've never played a game of AFL like at senior level, like competitively. I've played junior football. I've played state football. I've played, reserves football, like things like that. But I've never, for the life of me, ever seen somebody who is as terrible as Kaczynski has been since coming to us. Now, maybe when he first came, he was serviceable, but this game, a chest mark spills out of his hands, smacks him in the face, goes out of bounds. He takes a mark 5 metres out on a tight angle. Okay, fair enough, but 5 metres out from goal. And as he marked it, I turn to my dad and I go, it's Kaczynski. He'll find a way to fuck this up. He hand passes the ball to Thomas Sims, who is immediately tackled by 2 Essendon players, and they clear the ball out of forward 50. It was a game of comedy, skill, and error. It was a game that had me pulling my hair out, but at the end of the day, it was a game that we won. Luke Traynor getting the Rising Star nomination out of this round as well just solidified that. Taj Houghton making his debut and kicking a goal on debut as well. He is going to be a genuine star. This is a kid that was supposed to go top 5 in the draft, did his ACL. We picked him at pick 12, pick 13. He's going to be the steal of last year's draft. I can guarantee it. He's going to be infinitely greater than some of the players we lost to trade. When we lost Shea Bolton, I was upset, but when we drafted Houghton, I was like, okay, Bolton can fuck off to Perth, because Taj Houghton is going to be 10 times the player that Shea Bolton is at the peak of his powers. I'm calling it now. Taj Houghton has the ability, if he plays consistent midfield time, could see, I don't know if we go as early as saying off of one game he's going to win a Brownlow, but he's going to be one of those players that will be in those conversations. He's going to be a generational superstar. This is where we turn to the doom and gloom, if not the scoreboard didn't allude to that at all. Early on in the game, Ryan Mansell lays a fair and great hip and shoulder on Nick Martin. Nick Martin goes out of bounds. Unfortunately, has done himself an ACL and won't play for the rest of the year. Just adds to Essendon's woes. And then on top of that, Will Setterfield has done something in his foot and requires surgery, so he's done for the year. And Ben Hobbs has done a groin injury, so he might miss weeks as well. It just compacts a year that has been so damaging to Essendon off-field with all these injuries. And as a Richmond supporter, I can sympathise with that, because we've only just had a recent season where we pretty much expended almost our entire playing list from start to finish because of these injuries. Yeah, it's not good. And again, we can think it's unlucky, but we might have to turn attention to the staffing at Essendon, because some of these soft tissue injuries that are occurring and reoccurring and then, not recovering well, and then their recovery has to be extended. It's the conditioning teams and the fitness teams that need to be looked at as well. And this is what some media experts are now turning attention to with the same, kind of train of thought. So, be very interesting to see what happens at the end of the year for Essendon, because I feel there needs to be a shake-up. They need to get better staffing through. They need to get their players right. Do they keep some players? Do they move some players on? Scott's apparently come out and turned around and said if Essendon players don't want to stay, they're not going to be forced to. So this is the conversation that starts popping up. Does Darcy Parish look to go elsewhere? He's been linked to Geelong over recent years. Is Zach Merritt in a position where he's given his soul to this club for his whole career? Does he now have right to move on and go elsewhere? If you're an Essendon supporter, let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. For this game, however, as much as Zach Merritt fought his ass off, my votes land the way of 3 Tigers. The first of which I'm giving a vote to Ben Miller. Does not get spoken about near as enough. And some of his stats, people are going to look at it and go, why'd you give him, this vote? He's nothing, right? Fox Footy commentary could not talk about this guy any higher throughout the game and even at the end of the game. He's turning into an elite defender. This is a guy that shut down Jesse Hogan recent weeks ago to 0 goals. He has kept other, key forwards that normally get off the chain goalless or very limited to maybe 1 or 2 goals. He is going to be great for us moving forward. I've always said that when Broad and Vlosten leave, our defence is going to fall apart. But with Ben Miller back in, and even Tyler Young had a huge game for us on return as well. He hasn't played a game in a hot minute, and he just reminded everybody just how influential he is in our back six. These are guys that I'm happy to hang our hat on moving forward, because Ben Miller, I thought, was great in this game. He only had the 14 disposals, 11 kicks and 3 handballs. He had 8 marks, 3 tackles, 1 clearance, 316 metres gained, only had the 1 score involvement, but he had 11 pressure acts. He had 9 spoils. He was able to defensively get around in a game that was very scrappy, and I can understand the nature of the scrappiness of the game, but he was everywhere to shut it down. He was an outlet moving the ball out. He was getting forward half of the ball and moving the ball on. He was able to shut down Nate Caddy, I thought, incredibly well. The 2 votes I gave to Nick Vlosten in game 250. How this guy still hasn't got an All-Australian blazer is beyond me, and he just showed in this game why he has been one of the best defenders, I feel, in recent years, even though he hasn't been recognised as such, and he'll definitely go down as one of the best Tigers of the modern era. I truly feel that. He had 23 disposals, 15 kicks and 8 handballs, 8 marks, 4 tackles, 267 metres gained and 3 score involvements. And best on ground for me was Tim Taranto. He had 34 disposals, 15 kicks and 19 handballs, 7 marks, 5 tackles, 4 clearances, 410 metres gained, 1 goal, and 4 score involvements. Again, Zach Merritt could have slipped in. I just thought the effort of these 3 were a little bit better, given the fact that we won, given the fact that they were a little bit more influential on the outcome of the game. Richmond fans are stoked. Again, very scrappy win, and I think Uze hit the nail on the head in the press conference after the game. You know, at this point of our rebuild, for a team that was expected to not win a game, we will take a win out of an ugly game any day of the week, given the fact that we weren't predicted to win one. So Richmond win their 4th. Essendon back against the ropes with more injuries. I feel with losses like Setterfield, like Martin, compacted by the fact that they had no Jai Caldwell in this game, no Mackay, no Langford. The injuries are starting to come to a point where I feel Essendon very well may not win a game for the rest of the year. The final game on Saturday night saw Fremantle hosting Hawthorn at Optus Stadium in what was one of the games of the round. Again, very similar to the Bulldogs taking on Adelaide. 2 teams within the top 8 configuration that have thrown some question marks up respectively out of both of their own camps and had a lot to prove in this game. Fremantle had gone on a winning streak before losing to Sydney last week. They needed to get back home and get some ascendancy in their game. Hawthorn needed to start proving that they can contend amongst the contenders and build a little bit of belief not only in the fans but themselves. It was Fremantle in the end winning by a very narrow margin. I felt this was a game, however, especially in the final term, the scoreboard maybe flatters Hawthorn a little bit, because I feel Fremantle just went to a gear that Hawthorn weren't able to shut down, and this could have been very much so a much larger margin had opportunity not been wasted by Fremantle with ball in hand, given the fact that they had 4 behinds that I feel were very gettable in that final term. The scoreline breakdown saw Fremantle leading Hawthorn at quarter time at 3-1-19 to 2-2-14. 5 points away of Fremantle in a game where Fremantle got out to a lead. Hawthorn stemmed it back. Fremantle built a lead, and then Hawthorn managed to bring it back slightly going into the second term. At half time, it was Hawthorn leading at 7-4-46 to 6-1-37. Game on the line. Both teams are going to play out and come out hard in the second term. I was ready for an absolute slog. 3-quarter time saw Hawthorn leading 9-8-62 to 8-1-49. This was a game that I thought Hawthorn were going to skip away here. Now, a lot of people suggesting that in the final term, Fremantle got a lot more free kicks their way, and it was free kicks that cost Hawthorn this game. I have seen many Hawthorn fans take to social media and suggest that's not the case and they need to get better, and I feel that was very much the case. Fremantle's midfield absolutely destroyed Hawthorn's midfield in that second half. The final term definitely saw a gap between the skill level of both clubs, and I don't think we can really blame umpires here. We'll look at the stats in a second because I haven't checked out the free kick stats yet, but when players like Brayshaw and Sarong and Clark are all able to get off the chain as big as they did, it goes back to when I tipped Fremantle for this game. I turned around and I said the week prior against Sydney, they have enough players in their team, Sydney, that they were able to shut down a Jordan Clark. They were able to shut down a Caleb Sarong. They have players that play those roles. Hawthorn only have Finn McGuinness, who was brought in for this game. Now, when he was named, I thought, okay, he goes to Sarong. But that now affords Brayshaw the opportunity to get off the chain. If they don't shut down Jordan Clark, he's going to get big numbers off of half-back. And that's exactly what happened. The 3 of those players all had huge games and probably were the most influential when the ball was there to be won and the game was there to be won. And I feel they almost on their own were deciding factors. Lloyd Meek absolutely destroyed Darcy and Jackson collectively in the ruck. I feel Lloyd Meek was Hawthorn's best player on the field. So, just speaks volumes, I think, the gap between the best and the worst. To think that Hawthorn only managed to kick 2 behinds in the final quarter, but Fremantle went on to kick 4 goals for. it just shows the level gap, the skill gap. A lot of people now saying that on the off season this year, Hawthorn are going to have to go target some midfielders to bring in because they've been too defensively sound with their targeting. They've gone and gotten Battle, they've gone and gotten Barras, and people are suggesting they should have gotten one, not both. It's going to be an interesting watch to see how Hawthorn build. Both of these teams still very much within top 8 conversation. I feel both of these teams will play finals this year, just a matter of where they finish. Having a look at the team stats, let's just see the differential here with the free kicks and see if it was lopsided. It was actually, yeah, look, at the end of the day, 5 more free kicks. When you've got Fremantle who have been averaging 19 and they get 23, but Hawthorn have been averaging over 21 and they get 18, Hawthorn actually didn't hit their average, which is actually quite surprising. And some Hawthorn supporters even suggesting that they have had the better rub of the umpiring this year, which they definitely have. They just weren't getting sucked into Nick Watson going for a head high, and he's got to get that shit out of his game, because there were a couple of times where Luke Ryan tackled him and he could have seriously gotten hurt on his own accord, just how he approaches certain situations, little Watson. Again, though, we look at the stats just to see where the ascendancy came from. The efficiency inside 50, Fremantle were actually worse, but around the ground they were better with disposal. So again, it was just that final term. Their skill level was just able to jump that of Hawthorn's at the end of the day. We can talk about umpiring all we want. I just feel the skill gap between the two was evidently on show, especially in the final half. The 3-2-1 for this game, I did fall on the way of Fremantle, and I did give it to the 3 players I have already mentioned. The 1 vote I gave to Caleb Sarong, 29 disposals, 16 kicks and 13 handballs, 3 marks, 5 tackles, 9 clearances, 429 metres gained and 4 score involvements. Jordan Clark gets the 2 vote with 31 disposals, 21 kicks and 10 handballs, 7 marks, 3 tackles, 2 clearances, 591 metres gained and 4 score involvements. And best on ground for me, they tried to shut down Sarong, so this man was able to absolutely pop off, and that was Andrew Brayshaw. 29 disposals, 16 kicks, 13 handballs, 4 marks, 14 tackles, 6 clearances, 277 metres gained, 4 score involvements, a good busted old head, and getting a 3-minute interview post-game with blood pissing out of it and fucking looking like an absolute champion. It was a very interesting watch at the end of the game. Whoever cleared, Fox Footy to pull a guy aside that's got blood pissing out of his head and tripping down his face and covering his jersey. Interesting decision, but he was best on by a mile, and just to see him getting battered pillar to post, but still coming out on top in this contest, absolutely huge. Whether you're a fan of Fremantle, whether you're a fan of Hawthorn, I don't think we have anything to worry about here. Fremantle and Hawthorn have both proven their best is worthy of playing finals. I said it just a little bit ago. I feel both of these teams will play, but very similar to GWS, the gap between their best and their worst, I think, is still throwing up way too many question marks. And it's very well going to be a case of whether or not the teams that finish 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th can compete truly with 4th, 3rd, 2nd, and 1st. Because I feel there is a skill gap. And skill gap might be word of the day here, but there is definitely a skill gap between teams like a Collingwood, Geelong, Brisbane, and Adelaide versus a Fremantle, Hawthorn, GWS, the Bulldogs, teams like that. So, interesting watch with these two, but I think these two still come to point the end of the season will be there. Hawthorn, though, definitely has a lot more to work on moving forward. The first of 3 on Sunday saw Melbourne hosting North Melbourne at the MCG. We know earlier this year North Melbourne had a 60-odd point win over Melbourne. They absolutely thumped them. I thought there was a realm of possibility where that could happen, but then I saw the team lists and I saw no Nick Larkey, no Davies Uniacke, so Melbourne comfortably, I thought, yep, they're going to win this game. North Melbourne for 3 quarters really took it to them, and again, though, this has been the tale of the tape for many young teams this year. We see a 2-quarter, 3-quarter performance and then a final term fade out. And unfortunately for North Melbourne fans, that is exactly what happened in this game. It was North Melbourne at quarter time leading 4-2-26 to 3-3-21. Halftime saw Melbourne wrestle back that momentum, leading 6-5-41 to 5-6-36. 3-quarter time, the gap had been extended a little bit too much. 11-9-75, leading 8-11-59. And the final score line with a huge final term saw Melbourne kick 7 goals to finish 18-11, 119 to 12-11, 83. North Melbourne stemmed the flow just a tad. They'd kick a couple of goals, but then Melbourne had answers for them, and with efforts like Bailey Fritsch, Jake Melsham, Christian Petrarca in the second half, I felt was very influential on the game. A lot of people getting hammered into Christian Petrarca for his performance, but I think they're going off of fantasy stats, because I feel his influence on the game in the first half might have been a little bit average, like he was going at a very low percentage, he was turning the ball over, but again in the second half I feel he really lifted his game. I feel he was amongst Melbourne's best. Some people might scoff at that, but it's my opinion, so I can say what I want, alright? Biggest talking point out of this game, and it is one that has been dealt a card that we can talk about because we now know an outcome. There was a ruck contest in the forward line for North Melbourne, I believe it was. Max Gawn and Tristan Cherry obviously in the ruck going head to head. The tap comes down, ball spills out. It looks like Cherry goes to swing an arm to kind of knock the ball on. Unfortunately, Tom Sparrow comes through and he makes contact with Cherry's forearm. Instantly knocked out, hits the deck, stretcher has to come out, he's carried off. I made a very tongue-in-cheek dickhead call that it deserved more weeks than Tom Lynch, because Tom Lynch had potential to cause injury but didn't, but Cherry made contact and did. That's not what we're going with here. That was just me being a smart ass. What we're really getting with here was I said it was probably going to cop 2 to 3 weeks because precedent had been set that head-high contact is going to draw some sort of suspension. And even though it probably will be argued, I wouldn't be surprised if North Melbourne try to take this to the tribunal and have the severity overturned or the intent overturned, because it was marked as... was it intentional contact? I'm not entirely sure. I'd have to look deeper into it. But he has been hit with a 3-week ban for this. I feel North Melbourne are going to challenge. Whether they're successful, I don't think they will be. But again, just circumstances that really throws a blanket over the MRO completely. And just with things like Lynch, okay, he threw a deliberate fist. He gets 5 weeks. They're trying to stamp out throwing the fist. But then a player makes contact with the head and knocks a player out. He only gets 3. Some other players are making head-high contact. We saw earlier in the year, Rory Lobb makes a spoil and busts Mason Cox wide open. He doesn't even get a fine. So it's just very like line ball with where it lands. And I think we need to find consistency overall with the MRO. We'll talk about another instance in the final game for the round momentarily. But North Melbourne could be without Cherry for the next 3 weeks if they are unsuccessful in turning this over, and if they do choose to challenge, which is ultimately, I feel, their biggest out, because their next best in line in the ruck, nowhere near the level of Cherry, considering we're talking about Cherry being in All-Australian contention this year. For the overall outcome of this game, I did decide to give 1 vote to a North Melbourne player, despite the gap in score. 36 points was the final score line, by the way. I thought Harry Sheasel for North Melbourne just dug deep, and often does when it comes to North Melbourne, even if they are losing. Can't understate what this kid does, and a lot of people try to run it off as, oh, he's playing in the back line. North Melbourne are going to have a lot of ball in defence. You get the ball where you get it. He works hard to get the ball regardless of where the ball's at. He had 29 disposals, 14 kicks and 15 handballs, 6 marks, 6 tackles, 4 clearances, 316 metres gained, and 7 score involvements. The 2 vote I gave to Christian Petrarca, very controversial. I could have gone to Bailey Fritsch here. I could have even gone to Bailey Fritsch for, the 1 vote, considering he kicked 3 goals. But I thought still Christian Petrarca had plenty of the ball. He might have been very ineffective with the ball at times, but he still found a way, and you'll see the stats in a minute, to get involved and get influence on the scoreboard, which is the most important thing. He had 31 disposals, 11 kicks and 20 handballs, 5 marks, 3 tackles, 7 clearances, 333 metres gained, 1 goal, and had 12 score involvements. That's huge. Like, people were knocking him for his efficiency and not having much fantasy points, but 12 score involvements off of his 31 disposals. So we're talking about a third of his disposal count has resulted in Melbourne scoring. And in a game where they win by 6 goals, his influence on the game is rather huge. So I thought he was deserving of votes in this game. Best on ground, though, it's another game where he's absolutely popped off. Jake Melsham. I've often said Melbourne shouldn't be persisting with him because he's often, in previous years at least, on the out. And they've given him a chance this year, and he's had games where he's popped off. I'm going to look at the behind count in a minute because he's often having 8, 9, 10 shots on goal and peppering them. But he had another big game here. And when you win by 6 and he kicks 5 off his own boot, I'm chucking votes to him. 10 disposals, 9 kicks and 1 handball. So he's not setting the world on fire. But again, it's more of a quality of disposal versus quantity of disposal. 5 marks, 2 tackles, 293 metres gained, 5 goals, 7 score involvements. I just want to see how big he could have gone, given, again, the behind count. So he kicked 5 goals. He only missed 1, so he had 6 shots. So he was pretty good. Not like the other week where he kicked 5 goals and he could have had 9. But again, 5 goals in a game where you win by 6. Just forward half of the ball, Melbourne have been so haphazard. So have someone that you can now have utmost confidence in, I thought he was best on. People might question that. I honestly thought he had a brilliant game. Very much a dead rubber game because Melbourne's not playing for anything at this point in time. North Melbourne trying to avoid the bottom 4, so maybe they are playing for something. But ultimately, even especially with Cherry being out, this is going to be a season that sees North Melbourne finish in the bottom 4 again, which is the last 5 or 6 years they've been bottom 4. So a lot of people questioning whether this rebuild is successful. I mean, some of these young kids have only gotten on over the last 1 to 2 years, so it's going to take time to develop. I still feel North Melbourne are going to be one of those teams that flip the script when the time comes. I don't know when that's going to happen, however. Melbourne's still a letdown this year. Melbourne should still very well be around that finals contention, so the drop-off for them has been rather huge. I feel external influences off-field, especially during the pre-season, have crept in and caused disruption. There's now talk about Jake Lever being very pissed off that he was dropped a couple of weeks ago, so is now he available in a trade? I don't know. Interesting watch for them in the pre-season, Melbourne, but Melbourne get a big win. North Melbourne, unfortunately, just the injuries and outs they had, they couldn't be competitive for a longer period of time, because I definitely feel Davies Uniacke, Larkey, those type of players make this game a hell of a lot more interesting. But Melbourne walk away with the 4 points. Melbourne fans very happy, but they're still getting their cheese platters ready to go to the snowy mountains during September. Marvel Stadium played host to St Kilda, taking on Sydney in a game that I thought St Kilda was going to blow my certainty out of the water, because I took Sydney as my certainty for this week, and it looked like it was going to be absolutely detrimental that I absolutely did so, but it was let's do that again. Marvel Stadium played host to St Kilda, taking on Sydney. Sydney still mathematically possible to make finals, and are one of those teams that have done so in the past because everything's kind of aligned. St Kilda, on the other hand, just hunting for a win, and this game was very winnable for them. And for the majority of this contest, they led the contest, and it did look like they were going to win, which upset me because I took Sydney as my certainty for this round. But the scoreline will just show how big of an arm wrestle this was. It could have been a dead rubber game at quarter time because Sydney led 5-3-33 to 4 goals straight 24. 9 points, but we have seen in the past St Kilda struggle to kind of manage to find momentum when they've got backs against the wall, and Sydney, we've seen them kind of drop off when they hold a lead, so we don't know which way it's going to go moving forward from that point. At halftime, St Kilda took the lead 7-4-46 to 5-6-36. 3-quarter times saw St Kilda lead 11-8-74 to 9-7-61, and then the final scoreline in a very hard-fought contest to round it out, we had Sydney winning 14-8-92 to 13-9-87. This game was hard to watch, not for the competitiveness, because it was competitive, and I really enjoy a competitive game from teams like St Kilda and Sydney. You know, Sydney have that chance to make finals, but are kind of a little bit too far away from other teams. But can they win this game to keep their hopes alive? St Kilda just fighting for a bit of, a bit of momentum of their own, a little bit of respect, and to have an arm wrestle like this finish so close, as a neutral, I love it. But it was a hard watch given the fact that we saw one of the most gruesome injuries that I've seen in recent years go down, and poor Dan Butler comes out of a contest. I'm not going to show the footage, I'm not going to show any photos. You can go look at it yourselves on social media because it's fucking everywhere. he does a elbow injury, on his left arm. He's holding his arm like this, and you can just see his elbow and the top part of his arm are completely separated, and you've basically got one bone going this way, you got one bone sticking out this way, and it was. I saw it. And I can't even talk about it as well. It was bad. On the flip side as well, for Sydney, Tom McCartan went down with concussion, which is going to be huge for them because he is so pivotal to that back line. And with already seeing Joel Amadi out for the rest of the year with an injury, and Papley going down with a hamstring, they just had their forward connection working and they've kind of lost it. I think this now puts Sydney in a very unknown position. It's going to be interesting to see who can rise to the occasion for Sydney moving forward. But when you've got players popping off the way they do, and the level that some of these players have gone to, absolutely sensational. Tom McCartan did go down with concussion for Sydney as well, so that puts a big stint in their plans because he's just too invaluable, I feel, to their defensive half, especially with his intercept game. We know last week Sydney lost Papley to a hamstring, they lost Joel Amadi to an injury as well, so some of their key components are starting to fall to pieces again, so it's going to be interesting to see who can rise to the occasion. That being said, there are some players playing out of their skin, especially over recent weeks, and we're going to highlight one of those momentarily. Whether or not they're going to be an All-Australian contention in the form they're in, we can have a discussion about that. But, again, talk about some players I didn't vote for. Let's bring up some stats and talk about the efforts there. James Rowbottom, 15 tackles for the game, absolutely huge. Outside of that, there was a real gap between Sydney and St Kilda. So, Errol Goulden had 23, kicked one goal, but didn't really do as much as what we're used to seeing. Isaac Heaney had 21 and kicked one goal, but didn't really get to the level we've seen from him. Blakey had 23, but didn't really hit the strides that we're used to seeing from him. St Kilda, surprisingly for this game, had all the bigger players, like when we talk about output for stats and everything else, which is just Sydney getting down to the barrel of it, being able to capitalise when they had ball in hand. You know, it's all good that you've got players getting 25, 36, 23, 22, 24. But when players are having less disposal than you but having more impact, I feel you've got to turn attention to your overall game plan. For the votes for this game, despite the outcome, I have given St Kilda 2 of the 3. Just when you talk about the stats and the output these guys had, they were huge. And Brownlow calculations again, these two guys should very well be in the conversation. The one vote I gave to Marcus Winhager. He had 36 disposals, 20 kicks and 16 handballs, 8 marks, 3 tackles, 5 clearances, 365 metres gained and 8 score involvements. The 2 vote I gave to Brodie Grundy. This is the man where the conversation point comes in. With the month or two he has had, is this man looking at an All-Australian Blazer in the ruck? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. He had 20 disposals, 7 kicks and 13 handballs, 2 marks, 6 tackles, 46 hitouts, 7 clearances, 198 metres gained and 4 score involvements. But best on ground for me was Jack Steele. 25 disposals, 12 kicks, 13 handballs, 8 marks, 13 tackles, 3 clearances, 368 metres gained, 1 goal and 9 score involvements. Again, St Kilda fans lose this game, but I think they walk away holding their heads up high because they were competitive for 4 quarters, and that's all you can ask from a team like St Kilda, despite the fact I feel they should still be within that finals kind of conversation. For Sydney, they win. They might lose some players due to injury, but they keep their hopes alive. Can Sydney make the 8? That is the big question for them. And it's yet to be seen. I feel they're not going to, but hey, we've seen weird as shit go down. The final game of the round saw Port Adelaide hosting West Coast at Adelaide Oval. I said this was a game where Port Adelaide should have absolutely demoralised West Coast. However, I feel even though the scoreline at the end, blew out a little bit comparatively to the rest of the game, West Coast fans hold their heads up high for this loss, and Port Adelaide really fumbled a win here that they could have built a bit of percentage. Now, they're not playing for anything, but when we've seen some wins from Port Adelaide that they have accumulated this year, I expected a little bit more. At quarter time, West Coast were absolutely dominating this game, 6-3-39 to 2-2-14. So I thought, okay, fuck, this is going to be a game where West Coast are absolutely going to belt them. And they were still in front at halftime. They led 7-5-47 to 5-6-36. They still led at three-quarter time by the slimmest of margins, 9-6-60 to 7-12-54. But again, just like we spoke about in the North Melbourne game, a young list, late fade out. And that's all it came down to. It was Port Adelaide in the end, 12-15-87, defeating West Coast 9-7-61. West Coast only managing the single behind in the final term, with Port Adelaide going on to kick 5 goals 3. There was a head-to-head battle between Harley Reid and Jason Horne-Francis throughout this game, and it was great to watch the banter between the two. We were talking about suspensions in the MRO before. Harley Reid threw out a blatant leg that tripped up Travis Boak, and it was the most blatant trip I have seen in years. He got fined. I think he's been offered a $10,000 fine, argued down to about $6,250 with a guilty plea. Should be a suspension, straight up. You cannot deliberately kick a leg out and trip someone like that. It's fucking dangerous. Potential to cause injury, kind of thrown out the door. So again, that's where inconsistencies creep in. But when seeing a Horne-Francis and a Harley Reid go head to head, given the scope of, Horne-Francis leaving after 1 year at North Melbourne and Harley Reid now being spoken about potentially being shipped off to a club at the end of this year, if not next year, just the banter and them getting in each other's faces, I love it. I love the drama, love the Hollywood. But at the end of the day, Port Adelaide, just too good in the final term. And as much as I want to try to find a West Coast player to reward with votes in this game, there were just Port Adelaide players left, right and centre that you could pick out, and you could truly throw a blanket over maybe 5 or 6 of them that could be in the conversation for votes here. But before we talk about those players, there were some that we need to talk about in a little bit more upsetting light. Jason Horne-Francis has broken his foot and will miss the rest of the year, I'm hearing. Connor Rozee had a dislocation of some sort, I think, with a finger. He didn't play the rest of the game. A dislocation, I think maybe he doesn't miss a week. If he misses anything, it's just a week. For West Coast, I don't think there were any injuries. I will just make sure in the match report that there was nothing ill toward for West Coast in this game. Injuries, no. It was just a finger for Rozee. The injury from Horne-Francis was reported post-game, which is going to be huge for Port Adelaide because he's been down on input this year, I feel, Horne-Francis. He's been up and down, but he was definitely the best for Port Adelaide in this game. So at least for the rest of the season, they're going to be missing one of their key components, which is going to be damaging. But when you've got some other players now starting to rise to the occasion, it's an opportunity for Josh Carr to now test out a list and see where players fall in his kind of lineup moving forward. The one vote for this game I gave to Joe Richards. He had 23 disposals, 14 kicks and 9 handballs, 6 marks, 7 tackles, 1 clearance, 460 metres gained, 2 goals and 8 score involvements. The 2 vote I gave to Zach Butters. Misses a portion of the start of the year. Could he be in Brownlow calculations at this point of the year given what he has done since returning? Because he has been easily top 10 midfielder since returning without question. 38 disposals on the day with 21 kicks and 17 handballs, 6 marks, 2 tackles, 7 clearances, 552 metres gained, and 9 score involvements. And I thought best on was Jason Horne-Francis. 27 disposals, 19 kicks and 8 handballs, 2 marks, 6 tackles, 6 clearances, 620 metres gained, 3 goals, and 9 score involvements as well. So a win for Port Adelaide, which is compacted by injury. A loss for West Coast, which, after leading for most of the game and having that late fade out is going to be upsetting. But you're still seeing glimpses of improvement because this is a game where, let's be, without being too harsh, let's be real. Let's set some standards here. West Coast should not have been in this game at all, given the fact it's in Adelaide against Port Adelaide. Port Adelaide normally very dominant on this track. West Coast without some players. They dropped Tim Kelly again. I don't understand. Why do you re-sign him and then keep dropping him? But falling just short. I mean, in the end, it blows out to, what was the margin in the end? I think it was a bit flattering, 26 points. I think it was flattering for Port Adelaide in the end. The fade out hurts, and it hurts a lot of young teams. We've seen Richmond do it plenty of times this year. We've seen North Melbourne do it, West Coast do it. The likes of St Kilda and Essendon have done it as well. But it still holds you in good stead because you saw enough glimpses out of this game to know that West Coast in some areas are improving, and you hang your hat wherever you can on any improvement, if at all little. Again, another thing that came out of this game, and I wasn't going to touch on it, but I'm going to. We don't like to get controversial and get involved in politics, but Jack Gray himself reported himself to the AFL for making a homophobic slur, and he's been suspended for 4 weeks. Good on him for reporting himself. It's not been reported what he said, but it's bad enough to get 4 weeks. Let's not forget Willie Rioli has threatened numerous people over numerous, games from numerous clubs. Threats of violence and, physical harm, and you could even go as far as death threats, really, with some of the shit he said. He got 1 week. I don't want to talk about why I think he only got 1 week. If you know, you know. But I think if you're giving 1 week to somebody who's threatening physical violence and 4 weeks to someone who makes a homophobic slur, not at all suggesting homophobic slurs are okay, racial slurs, anything like that, there needs to be a common ground. Threatening a player, slurs, everything else, blanket it with a set of weeks. Not this whole, for everybody that uses a homophobic slur, we're chucking an extra week on, because that's what they've done. We saw 1 week, then 2 weeks, then 3 weeks, now 4 weeks. The next person that does it will cop 5 weeks. No, there needs to be a standard. 3 weeks, 2 weeks, whatever you want to do it. Set the bar. Even. I don't want to talk about it anymore, but that's just my thought. If you want to discuss it more, let's have a talk about it down below. With all my votes calculated after 18 rounds of football, this is how my top 5 is situated. In 5th place on 20 votes, we have Fremantle's Andrew Brayshaw. In 4th place on 21 votes, we have Fremantle's Caleb Sarong. In 3rd place on 22 votes, we have Geelong's Bailey Smith. In 2nd place on 26 votes, we have a tie between Adelaide's Jordan Dawson and Gold Coast's Noah Anderson. And in 1st place, leading by a singular vote, we have Collingwood's Nick Dacos. With the individual standpoint out of the way, we can now have a look at the collective standpoint and see where the teams are situated on the ladder after 18 rounds. And we have seen a little bit of shifting in that top 8 configuration. Again, handful of teams competing for spots. These last few games at the end of the year is going to be incredibly telling. In 1st place on 56 points, a game and a half clear of any other club, we have Collingwood. We then have Brisbane in 2nd place, half a game clear on 50 points. Our top 4 is rounded out by Adelaide in 3rd place on 48 points and Geelong in 4th place on 44 points. This is where percentage is big, because from 4th to 8th, every single team is on 44 points collectively. We are all split by percentage. In 5th place, we have the Gold Coast. In 6th place, we have Hawthorn. In 7th place, we have GWS. And in 8th place, we have Fremantle. In 9th place, just out by a game, is Western Bulldogs. We then have Sydney trailing in 10th place on 32, similar to Port Adelaide. We have Carlton in 12th and Melbourne in 13th, with Essendon in 14th, all on 24. We have St Kilda in 15th on 20. North Melbourne is 16th on 18. Richmond is in 17th on 16. And West Coast is on the bottom of the ladder, having only won that one game against St Kilda earlier in the year, on 4 points. There is only one thing left for me to do before we wrap this video up and officially recap the round, and that is to announce my team of the week for round 18. I've just made a shift. I originally had Matthew Nix as my coach of the week, given the effort of Adelaide against the Bulldogs. I could have gone Adam Kingsley against Geelong, but the coach I've given it to, I think, given the scope of what went down this weekend, I think it's fitting. Even though it might pain me just a little bit. So this is how I landed for my team of the week for round 18. In defence, we have Jordan Clark and Lockie Whitfield in the back pockets and Ben Miller at full back. Across halfback, we have Dane Zorko and Josh Dacos on the halfback flanks and Nick Vlosten at centre halfback. Across the centre, I have Joe Richards and Darcy Wilmot on the wings, with Jordan Dawson in the centre. In my forward line, I have Jason Horne-Francis and Christian Petrarca on the half-forward flanks and Riley Thilthorpe at centre-half forward, with Jake Melksham and Cooper Harvey in the forward pockets and Aaron Cadman at full forward. In the ruck, I've got Brodie Grundy, and following him, I have Noah Anderson in ruck rover and Marcus Bontempelli as rover. On the interchange, I have Andrew Brayshaw, Jack Steele, Matt Rowell, and Zach Butters. Tim Taranto is my sub of the week, and my coach of the week is Damien Hardwick. That is it for this video, ladies and gentlemen. The round has officially been recapped. I thank you all for joining me once again. A few discussion points have come out of today's video, so if you want to answer any of those discussion points, if you've got anything else you would like to talk about, or you've got any suggestions for content you would like to see me make, let me know in the comment section down below, or feel free to hit me up on social media. Those links are in the description of this video. Do leave a like if you enjoy what I do. I appreciate the support that you guys are throwing out, and if you would love to jump on board and join the community we are building here together, hit that subscribe button as well. But that's it from me, guys. I'm out of here, and as always, I will catch you guys next time.